When my family's secrets came to light, I realized the price of their love was too high. All that glitters isn't gold. Growing up, I always thought my family was perfect. You know the type. Picturesque Christmas cards, big Sunday dinners, the whole 9 yards. But as I got older, I realized that perfection was just a well-rehearsed play. By the time I left for college, I knew I'd never come back. Not because I didn't love them, but because I didn't love who I became around them. My father, Archer, was a master manipulator, always finding ways to make you feel like you owed him something. My mother, Margot, was his silent accomplice, smoothing over the damage with smiles and platitudes. And my siblings, Brooks and Sienna, let's just say they perfected the family act. So when my phone lit up with a call from my father, after nearly 6 years of radio silence, I almost didn't pick up. But something in me, curiosity, guilt, maybe a mix of both, made me answer. "Zane," he said, his voice smoother than I remembered. "It's time we moved past everything. Come home. Your mother misses you. We all do." I wanted to hang up. Every instinct screamed at me to say no. But instead, I found myself agreeing. Maybe it was the way his voice cracked when he said "your mother," or maybe I just wanted to believe that people could change. Either way, a week later, I was driving back to the house I swore I'd never step foot in again. The house looked the same as it always had, big, pristine, and imposing. The kind of house that screams we have money, but never feels like a home. My mother greeted me at the door, pulling me into a hug so tight it almost felt genuine. "Oh, Zane, you look so grown up," she said, brushing imaginary lint off my jacket. "We've missed you." I forced a smile. "It's good to see you too, Mom." Inside, nothing had changed. The same polished floors, the same expensive furniture, even the same faint smell of Margot's signature lavender candles. Sienna bounded down the stairs, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Zane, oh my God, it's been forever," she said, wrapping me in a hug. Her enthusiasm felt real, and for a moment, I let myself believe it was. Brooks was less enthusiastic. He leaned against the doorframe of the study, his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. Well, the prodigal son returns," he said. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." I bit back a snarky reply and extended my hand. "Good to see you too, Brooks." Dinner that night was a performance, as always. My parents played the roles of loving, doting caregivers, asking about my life as if they hadn't ignored it for the past 6 years. Sienna chimed in with stories about her college adventures, while Brooks mostly kept to himself, sipping his wine and watching me like a hawk. It wasn't until later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, that I started to feel the cracks in the facade. I was wandering the halls, letting nostalgia wash over me, when I noticed a door I didn't recognize. It was at the end of the east wing, where my parents' bedroom was. The door was locked, which struck me as odd. Growing up, my parents had always insisted on an open doors policy. No secrets, no locked doors. So why now? I was about to head back to my room when Sienna appeared behind me, startling me. "Looking for something?" she asked, her voice light but her eyes wary. "No," I said quickly. "Just remembering." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You've been gone a long time. Things change." Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, staring at the locked door. The next morning, I decided to shake off the weirdness and focus on reconnecting. My father invited me to his study for a man-to-man talk, which turned out to be him lecturing me about the importance of family loyalty. He didn't outright say it, but the implication was clear. Leaving had been a betrayal. "You've always been the stubborn one," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "But stubbornness doesn't get you far in this world. Family does." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The whole conversation felt rehearsed, like he was trying to convince me of something without saying it outright. Later, when I was helping my mother in the kitchen, I tried to bring up the locked door. "Mom, what's with the new door in the east wing?" I asked casually. Her hands stilled for a fraction of a second before she resumed chopping vegetables. "Oh, that's just storage. Your father had it installed a few years ago. Nothing interesting." But the way she avoided my gaze told me it was anything but nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The locked door was like a splinter in my mind, and Sienna's cryptic comment didn't help. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed and made my way back to the east wing. The door was still locked, of course, but this time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Faint scratch marks near the bottom, like someone had tried to claw their way in or out. I backed away, my heart pounding. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't just storage. As I turned to leave, I heard a noise behind me, a soft creak, like a floorboard shifting under weight. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next day, I decided to call Harper, my best friend from childhood. She was the one person who had always been honest with me, even when it hurt. "You're back at the house? Are you insane?" she said when I told her. "It's not like that," I said. "My dad called. He said they wanted to fix things." Harper snorted. "And you believed him?" "I don't know. Maybe. But something's off. There's this locked door, and Sienna's acting weird and—" "Zane, listen to me. Your family doesn't do anything without a reason. If something feels off, it's because it is. Be careful." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up, because deep down, I knew she was right. My family didn't do anything without a reason. And whatever that reason was, I was starting to think it had nothing to do with wanting me back. The morning after my call with Harper, I woke up to the sound of laughter drifting from the kitchen. For a moment, it almost felt like old times, like we were a normal family, having a normal day. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let me relax. When I walked into the kitchen, my father and Brooks were deep in conversation, their voices dropping to whispers the moment they saw me. "Morning, Zane," Archer said, his smile too wide to be genuine. "Sleep well?" "Fine," I lied, grabbing a cup of coffee. I glanced at Brooks, who gave me a curt nod before excusing himself. As he walked out, I noticed him slip something into his pocket, a small, folded envelope. "Where's Mom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's out running errands," my father said. "Sienna's still sleeping. You know how she is. Lazy mornings, late nights." He chuckled, but it felt hollow. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, so I excused myself, determined to follow Brooks. I waited until he left the house, then slipped out after him. He headed toward the old shed at the edge of the property, a place we hadn't used in years. I hung back, watching as he unlocked the door and disappeared inside. When he finally left the shed, he was carrying a small box, and his expression was tense. He glanced over his shoulder, almost as if he could sense he was being watched. I ducked behind a tree, holding my breath until he walked back toward the house. Once he was out of sight, I crept toward the shed. The door was unlocked now, so I slipped inside. It was just as dusty and cluttered as I remembered, but something was off. A section of the floorboards near the back looked newer than the rest. I knelt down and pried one up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a stack of papers, financial documents, contracts, and what looked like blackmail letters. My heart raced as I flipped through them. Most of it didn't make sense, but one name stood out: Sadie. The name had come up before, in hushed tones, but no one had explained who she was. Now, it seemed like she was at the center of something big. Before I could process what I was looking at, I heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, I shoved the papers back into the compartment and replaced the floorboard. I barely managed to slip out the side door before Brooks entered the shed again, his face twisted in frustration. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the papers, or the locked door in the house. I decided to confront Sienna. She had always been the most open of my siblings, and if anyone would tell me the truth, it was her. I found her in her room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled when I walked in, but her expression faltered when she saw the seriousness on my face. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. "Okay," she said slowly, sitting up. "What's going on? What's behind the locked door in the East Wing?" I asked bluntly. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me. But then she shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Sienna. I saw the scratches on the door, and I saw Brooks in the shed today, hiding something. What's going on?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "Zane, I I can't. You can't, or you won't? Her silence was answer enough. Frustrated, I decided to go straight to the source, my parents. I waited until the next morning, when I knew they'd both be in the study. Archer was behind his desk, his face buried in paperwork, while Margot sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine. Can we talk? I asked, stepping inside. My father looked up, his expression unreadable. Of course. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath. Who's Sadie? The question landed like a bomb. Margot froze, the magazine slipping from her hands, while Archer's face darkened. Where did you hear that name? He demanded, his tone sharp. It doesn't matter where I heard it. Who is she? She's no one, Margot said quickly, her voice shaking. Just an old family acquaintance. Then why is her name all over those papers in the shed? I asked, crossing my arms. And why is everyone acting like they're hiding something? My father stood up, his towering presence suddenly intimidating. Zane, I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but I suggest you drop it. Now. Or what? I shot back. You'll throw me out again? Enough. Margot shouted, her voice breaking. Zane, please. Just let it go. But I couldn't. Not now. That night, I called Harper again. Something's going on, I said. There's this woman, Sadie, and my parents are freaking out every time I bring her up. And then there's the locked door. Zane, stop, Harper interrupted. You need to leave. I'm serious. Whatever's going on, it's not safe for you. I can't leave, I said. Not until I figure out the truth. Harper sighed. Then at least let me help you. Send me pictures of the papers, the door, whatever you've got. I'll see what I can dig up. I agreed, feeling a little less alone now that she was involved. But as I hung up, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door, which I had locked earlier, was slightly ajar. Cautiously, I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The room looked untouched, but when I checked my phone, the photos of the shed documents I'd taken earlier were gone. Someone had been in my room, and whoever it was didn't want me finding answers. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting, and it sent a chill down my spine. Leave now, or you'll regret it. I crumpled the note in my fist, anger and fear bubbling inside me. If my family thought they could scare me into silence, they were dead wrong. The note wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. If someone thought they could scare me away, it only made me more determined to dig deeper. I tucked the crumpled paper into my pocket and headed downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen, their laughter ringing out like nothing had happened. It was so ordinary, so infuriatingly normal, that it made my stomach churn. Zane, you're up early, Margot said, pouring herself a cup of tea. Sleep well? Well enough, I said flatly, watching their faces for any sign of guilt. Archer glanced at me over the rim of his coffee mug, his expression unreadable. I needed a break from their performance, so I decided to pay a visit to Eliza, my mother's estranged sister. She'd been the black sheep of the family, the one who always refused to play along with the shiny family narrative. If anyone could shed light on the secrets I was uncovering, it was her. Eliza lived on the outskirts of town, in a modest house that was the polar opposite of the sprawling estate I'd grown up in. She opened the door before I even had a chance to knock. Zane, she said, her voice tinged with surprise. I wasn't expecting you. Can we talk? I asked. It's about the family. She studied me for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. Her house was cozy and cluttered, filled with books and mismatched furniture. She gestured for me to sit, then perched on the edge of a worn armchair, watching me intently. What's going on? She asked. I hesitated, unsure where to start. There's a lot. A locked door, a name, Sadie, and a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't add up. Mom and Dad are acting like they've got something to hide, and I think Brooks and Sienna know more than they're letting on. At the mention of Sadie, Eliza's face darkened. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Sadie, she said bitterly. Of course. You know her? I pressed. She's not someone you forget, Eliza said. She was involved with your father years ago, back when you were a kid. Let's just say their relationship wasn't professional. What do you mean? I asked, my heart pounding. Eliza hesitated, as if debating how much to tell me. Your father used her to get what he wanted. Money, influence, power. She was the key to all of it. But when she outlived her usefulness, he cut ties. Or at least, he tried to. She didn't take it well. The pieces started falling into place. Sadie wasn't just some random name. She was a thread in the tangled web my family had woven, a thread that had somehow unraveled. Armed with Eliza's revelations, I returned to the house, determined to confront my parents. But when I walked through the door, I found Margot and Archer arguing in the study. Their voices were low, but I caught snippets of their conversation. She's not going to stop, Margot was saying. We should have dealt with her when we had the chance. And risk everything? Archer shot back. No, we handle this quietly. I stepped back before they could see me, my mind racing. They had to be talking about Sadie. Whatever she was holding over them, it was big enough to scare even Archer. I decided to search the study while they were distracted. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A key, tucked away in the bottom drawer of Archer's desk. My gut told me it was for the locked door in the east wing. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep before making my move. The house was eerily quiet as I crept toward the east wing. The key fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the door swung open. The room was dark, but the faint glow of a nightlight revealed its contents. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary guest room, until I saw the walls. They were covered in photos, newspaper clippings, and hand-scrawled notes, all connected by red string. It was like something out of a crime show, and at the center of it all was a photo of Sadie. My stomach dropped as I scanned the room. There were documents detailing financial transactions, legal threats, and even surveillance photos. It was clear that my parents had been keeping tabs on Sadie, and that she'd been doing the same to them. Then I saw it, a small safe tucked into the corner. The key didn't work on it, but I managed to pry it open with a screwdriver I'd grabbed from the garage. Inside was a diary, bound in cracked leather. The handwriting was familiar. It belonged to my mother. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. The entries were fragmented, but they painted a chilling picture. Margot had known about Archer's dealings with Sadie and had even helped cover them up. There were references to payoffs, threats, and something called the arrangement. But the most chilling part came near the end, in an entry dated 10 years ago. If Sadie exposes us, it's over. We've built everything on this. She's too dangerous to leave loose ends. Before I could process what I just read, the sound of footsteps snapped me out of my daze. I barely had time to shove the diary into my jacket before the door creaked open. It was Sienna. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I saw you sneaking around," she said. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." "Don't lie to me, Sienna. You've known about all of this, haven't you?" Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the bed. "I didn't know everything," she said. "But yes, I knew about Sadie. Mom and Dad made me swear not to say anything." "Why?" I demanded. "What's so important that they'd go to these lengths to hide it?" Sienna looked up at me, tears in her eyes. "Because if the truth comes out, we lose everything. The house, the money, the reputation. It's all built on lies." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always known my family wasn't perfect, but this was something else entirely. "Zane," she said, her voice trembling, "you have to stop digging. Please. For all of our sakes." But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. Sienna's plea stuck with me long after she left the room, but not in the way she'd hoped. Her desperation only fueled my resolve. Whatever my family was hiding, it was big enough to scare even her, and I wasn't about to let it go. The next day, I decided to confront Brooks. He was the most closed off of us, but I'd seen the cracks in his armor. The papers in the shed, the envelope he'd pocketed. He was involved, whether he liked it or not. I found him in the garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle he'd been fixing for years. He barely glanced at me as I walked in. "Need something?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rack. "Answers," I said, cutting straight to the point. "I know about Sadie. I know about the shed. I know about the diary. His hands stilled, and for a moment, I thought he might actually deny it. But then he sighed and tossed the rag onto the workbench. You should have stayed gone, Zane, he said, his voice heavy. This was never your fight. Yeah, well, you don't get to decide that, I shot back. Now, tell me what's going on. He leaned against the workbench, running a hand through his hair. Fine. You want the truth? Sadie was Dad's partner in some shady deals. She helped him launder money, blackmail competitors, you name it. But when she started asking for a bigger cut, things got messy. How messy? I asked, my stomach twisting. Messy enough that Dad had to make her disappear, Brooks said, his voice barely above a whisper. But she didn't go quietly. She left behind evidence. Stuff that could ruin all of us. My head was spinning as I left the garage. Sadie hadn't just been a partner. She'd been a threat. And now, her shadow loomed over everything. I tried to call Harper, desperate to tell someone, but she didn't pick up. My unease deepened as the hours passed with no word from her. Harper was always the reliable one. For her to go silent now didn't feel right. By nightfall, I was pacing my room, debating whether to call the police. But what could I say? That my family was hiding a decade-old conspiracy? Without hard evidence, it would just be my word against theirs. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Sienna, her face pale and tear-streaked. Harper's gone, she said, her voice trembling. What do you mean, gone? I demanded. She called me earlier, Sienna said. She said she'd been digging into Sadie's past and found something. She was supposed to meet me, but she never showed up. Panic gripped me. Harper had warned me to be careful, and now she was missing. I grabbed my jacket and keys, ignoring Sienna's protests as I headed for the door. I drove to Harper's apartment, my heart pounding. Her car was still in the lot, but her lights were off, and there was no answer when I knocked. I tried the door and found it unlocked. Inside, the place was a mess. Papers scattered, drawers pulled open, like someone had been searching for something. On her desk, I found a single sheet of paper with Sadie's name scrawled across it, along with an address. It was in a seedy part of town, far from the pristine suburbs my family called home. I didn't stop to think. I needed answers, and this was my only lead. The address led me to a rundown apartment building. The hallway reeked of mildew and despair, and the flickering overhead light did little to chase away the shadows. I knocked on the door marked with the address, half expecting no one to answer. But someone did. The woman who opened the door was younger than I expected. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. Her expression hardened the moment she saw me. You must be Zane, she said, her voice cool. You're Sadie, I said, more a statement than a question. She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The apartment was sparse, almost barren, with only a couch and a coffee table in the living room. On the table sat a stack of documents and a laptop, both of which she quickly closed as I approached. I've been expecting you, she said, sitting on the couch. Your family isn't exactly subtle. Where's Harper? I demanded. Sadie arched an eyebrow. Your little friend? I don't know. But if she's missing, I'd start with your father. My father? I repeated, disbelief laced in my voice. Sadie leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine. Archer doesn't take kindly to loose ends. I should know. I was almost one of them. Sadie's words confirmed what I'd already suspected. My father was far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. But before I could press her for more, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Stop now, or Harper won't be the only one who disappears. I showed the message to Sadie, who frowned. They're getting desperate, she said. But they won't stop unless someone stops them first. And that someone is me? I asked, my voice heavy with sarcasm. You're the only one who cares enough to burn it all down, she said simply. Your brother and sister are too scared. Your mother is too complicit. It's you or no one. Her words hung in the air like a challenge. And as much as I hated to admit it, she was right. When I got back to the house, the tension was palpable. My father was in his study, the door closed, while my mother sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television. Sienna was nowhere to be found. I went straight to the study, not bothering to knock. Archer looked up, startled, as I stormed in. "Where's Harper?" I demanded. He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "She's missing, and I know you're involved." His expression darkened. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Zane." "So are you." I shot back. "Sadie told me everything. The money, the blackmail, the lies. I know it all." Archer stood, his towering presence as intimidating as ever. "You don't know a damn thing." "Then tell me," I shouted. "Tell me the truth, or I swear I'll go to the police." For a moment, I thought he might hit me, but instead, he sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I did, everything we did, was to protect this family. To protect you." "Protect us from what?" I demanded. "Sadie? The truth? From the consequences," he said. "You think this world is fair? You think people like us can stay on top by playing nice? Sadie was a necessary evil. And when she became a liability, we handled it." "Handled it how?" I asked, my voice trembling. Archer's eyes met mine, cold and unflinching. "The same way I'll handle you if you don't stop digging." I left the room, my mind racing. My father's words weren't just a warning. They were a promise. And if I wanted to survive, I'd have to find a way to beat him at his own game. I spent the night going over everything I knew. Sadie's warnings, Sienna's tears, Brooke's cryptic confessions, and Archer's chilling threat. It all pointed to the same conclusion. My family wasn't just complicit in something dark, they were orchestrating it. And now I had a choice. Walk away and let their secrets fester, or expose them and risk becoming the next loose end. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't walk away, not after what they'd done to Harper, not after what they'd done to Sadie. If my family's love came at the cost of complicity, it wasn't love at all. The first thing I did was text Sadie. I told her I was in and asked her to send me everything she had. Photos, documents, recordings. Within an hour, she'd sent a torrent of evidence. Financial statements linking Archer to shell companies, emails discussing blackmail schemes, even photos of Sadie and Archer together during their partnership. It was enough to bury my family if it ever went public. Next, I called Eliza. If anyone could help me understand the full scope of what I was dealing with, it was her. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "I need your help," I said, cutting to the chase. "Sadie gave me everything. I'm going to expose them." There was a long pause. "Zane," she said carefully, "do you know what you're doing? Your father won't go down without a fight." "I don't care," I said. "This has to end." Eliza sighed. "Then you'll need to be smart about it. Don't confront them directly. Gather your evidence, and when you're ready, go public. The press, the authorities. Someone who can't be bought off." Her words made sense, but they also painted a target on my back. If my family suspected what I was planning, they wouldn't hesitate to stop me. I spent the rest of the day combing through Sadie's files, trying to piece together the full picture. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. Archer hadn't just used Sadie to climb the social ladder. He'd used her to destroy lives. There were letters from people he'd blackmailed, begging him to stop, threatening to go to the police. One letter ended with a chilling sentence. "If anything happens to me, the truth will come out." But whoever had written it hadn't lived to tell their story. Their name was scribbled out, but Sadie had written a note in the margin. "He'll kill again if he has to." That evening, I finally heard from Harper. Her voice was shaky, but alive. "Zane, I'm okay," she said. "I had to lay low. Someone's been following me." "Harper, you need to get out of town," I said. "They know you've been helping me." "I'm not leaving you to deal with this alone," she said firmly. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't lose you too." There was a long pause before she finally relented. "Okay, but you'd better take these bastards down." "I will," I promised. The next morning, I found Sienna waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red. "I know what you're planning," she said softly, "and I want to help." I frowned. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being scared," she said, her voice trembling. "Tired of pretending everything's okay when it's not. If you're going to expose them, I want to be there. Her words surprised me, but I didn't have time to question her motives. I needed all the allies I could get. Okay, I said, but you have to be ready. Once we do this, there's no going back. Sienna and I spent the day preparing. She gave me access to her laptop, where she'd saved screenshots of emails between Archer and Margot. They were cold, calculated exchanges, discussing cleanup, strategies, and liabilities like they were nothing more than business expenses. That night, I set my plan in motion. I uploaded everything Sadie had sent me to a secure cloud folder and scheduled it to send to multiple news outlets if anything happened to me. I also wrote a letter detailing everything I knew, naming names and implicating my family in their crimes. With the evidence secured, it was time for the confrontation. I found Archer in the study, as usual. Margot was with him, her face tight with worry. They looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting from surprise to suspicion. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. Archer leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "This should be good." "I know everything," I said, laying a printout of Sadie's files on the desk. "The money laundering, the blackmail, Sadie, everything." Margot's face went pale, but Archer didn't flinch. "And what do you plan to do with it?" he asked, his voice calm. "Expose you," I said. "The press, the authorities. They'll all know what you've done." For the first time, Archer smiled. "You think they'll believe you? You're my son. If I go down, you go down with me." "I've got nothing to lose," I said. "Can you say the same?" His smile faltered, but before he could respond, Margot spoke up. "Zane, please," she said, her voice trembling. "We did it for you. For the family." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You did it for yourselves. To keep up your perfect image. And now it's over." Before I could say more, the door burst open, and Brooks stormed in. He looked between us, his face a mask of fury. "You've ruined everything," he said, glaring at me. "Do you know what you've done?" "I'm ending it," I said. "No more lies. No more manipulation." Brooks lunged at me, but before he could reach me, Sienna stepped between us. "Enough," she shouted, her voice cracking. "We're done, Brooks. We're done." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Then Archer stood, his expression dark and unreadable. "You're making a mistake," he said. "But if you think you can destroy this family, you're wrong." I left the house that night, knowing I couldn't stay. My evidence was already on its way to the press, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the fallout began. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I hadn't just lost my family, I destroyed them, but for the first time in years, I felt free. All that glitters isn't gold. Sometimes it's just a facade, hiding the rot beneath. And as much as it hurt to tear it down, I knew it was the only way to truly be free.